Hey Matt, how you doing? Welcome to the pod.
Hello, hello.
Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm a listener and a fan of the pod, so cool to be on here today.
Awesome. Um, so you identify as a product engineer. So I think you're a product engineer at Arrows. Is that right? Currently?
Yeah, I mean, technically I'm the CTO at Arrows, but I write a lot of code, so I still struggle to identify as the CTO of like a 10-person company.
Sure. Yes. But you also write boring Rails, which would you call a movement, a Substack, a
I
philosophy?
just call it a blog, but
Yeah.
yeah,
And also the Yagni podcast, although none this year it seems like.
yeah. No, I do. There'll be more Yagna this year. I do it
Okay.
as seasons, so usually there's a season in the fall.
Got it. Okay. So you're pretty prolific for a CTO. I feel like most engineers are a bit more in the mines and less making content.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably true. I don't really know why that is necessarily, but I guess it maybe comes with like the product engineer way of thinking too. It seems like you end up writing a lot, and I'm fortunate enough to work at a place that values me sharing some of that writing outside of the company, and yeah, so that's mostly where a lot of my stuff comes from. And so as a result, I think some of it is more grounded in like practical things, or like here's how we have you know built a feature in an actual code base instead of like a tutorial, and that seems to strike a chord with some people.
Yeah. How do you define product engineer, by the way?
Good question. I feel like hard to it's hard to define really, but I feel like it's always been someone who is writing code, but is not like a designer, but cares about design, and is not like a product manager, but cares about like the user experience or like the flows of the features. And so it kind of gets all, you know, mixed up and morphed into this bucket where you have other like product adjacent type skills, but you're still like technical and writing code. And what it means in practice is, at least how we kind of run things at Arrows, is that the engineer is kind of like the directly responsible person for a feature, and that might include writing up like the spec of the feature. It might include like doing mock-ups or like flows, and then probably you're coordinating with a designer on actually implementing it, and you're probably coordinating with somebody maybe on the customer or like product team in terms of like soliciting feedback, but you're kind of able to do it all. And so that's what I kind of think of when I think of a product engineer, somebody that's able to ship things end to end, where end to end doesn't necessarily mean like the full stack code, but also the rollout and customer migration, and helping plan some like the feature basically.
So if it's not including design there, what is the difference between an engineer and a product engineer? Like, what do you see as a distinguishing thing there? I would expect a normal engineer to deploy things, to document things, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, at least in my experience, has been like having opinions about some of that stuff, and having like good product taste, but maybe your taste sort of exceeds your ability.
Okay. So you're actually contributing to product-based decisions of how this UI should look, what happens when you click here, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think for me, like early in my career, I worked at a consulting agency, and so it was very much like you are paid to sort of program the code part, and we have designers that will do the design, and we have product managers that will sort of decide what we're building and decide how it's going to work, and like maybe what the rough flows are going to be, and then we have like marketing people that are going to figure out how we roll out the feature. And I always like to kind of dip my toes in some of those things, but I never was really like fully doing it all. I just kind of early in my career, I would just say like, oh, I just have opinions on how these things should be done. And so I kind of backed into that framing of a product engineer as someone who, cares about those things and wants to contribute on, that, I guess that's the positive framing. The negative framing is like, I just cannot delegate, these things to other people.
I think, do you think this came out of your like consultancy background to some extent?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was, I think you and I have a similar background in working at, an agency doing, custom software work. And I always found myself like sort of frustrated, but I could understand why companies didn't want to like necessarily outsource all of the product thinking work to, a development agency. But I found that like I was always only being used with like 80% of my ability when it was like, oh, just, be the tech lead on this project, or hey, we just need you to like write the code. And like I was happy to do that, but I always felt like it wasn't a perfect fit. So obviously, if you can find something that's like, oh yeah, this utilizes all my abilities, then I'll feel like most engaged and most fulfilled with the work. And so, but ultimately, like when I was at working at the consulting company, I did sort of like carve out a title and a track of like a product engineering role. And what it ultimately usually meant was that I just got into lots of arguments with the designers and product people in that context. But so that was sort of when I realized that it was like consulting for a software development agency was not like the perfect alignment of what I was interested in and what I wanted to do. And that was part of the reason like I'm, working, at a small startup where some of that is more useful and valuable just because we don't have a ton of people. So there's a lot of overlap in the roles that people are doing.
Yeah, I saw on your controversial advice for juniors tweet that you think folks should work in person at a consulting shop as an early job, which I think I more or less agree with. I did think it was very useful for me to get exposed to a number of different projects. Although I would probably, I think it's a good choice, and I think there's some strength. There's some definitely some pros in like seeing a variety of things, like spinning up a number of greenfield projects, supporting existing legacy projects, getting good at diving into a new domain. That all feels useful that you wouldn't get at like a single product company. Although I would probably say I think most of that is actually dwarfed by the quality of your coworkers.
Yeah, I think that is true. Obviously, if you're working at some like body shop or like global mega corporation where you are really just like being staff hogged out to some other mega corporation, probably a lot different than working at a boutique agency that is selling a the thing about agencies, at least like the type of kind of boutique agencies that you and I both have worked for, is that part of what you're selling is quality and these software practices, and so those are part of the offering, and so those are valued by the business. Whereas if you're working at like Infosys, like they don't really care. They're just trying to like get the bodies like billing the hours. And I think when you're early in your career, like it's great if at work you're encouraged and there's space made for you to read a book about how to do something, or to watch a conference talk, or to have discussions with your coworkers about code and not be so worried about like crushing Jira tickets.
Thinking back, I feel like at Thoughtbot I learned I got most of my skill improvement from conversations with coworkers, like in particular, like some dev discussions we did, maybe PR reviews that were very thorough, or pair programming. And so, yeah, I think I would tell most people that the first thing to optimize for actually is the quality of the folks you're working with. But I also noticed, I have to say, I noticed and liked your, like you said, like an in-person consultancy, which I agree with that, particularly early in your career. I feel like this model of like I think remote work works better probably when you're a bit further along. You've got more experience and you can be more siloed successfully.
Yeah. It sucks that it feels like that's kind of like a ladder that gets pulled up of people of like, oh, once you like become more senior, then like just work remotely, and you're sort of like taking yourself out of the pool potentially. Like I think there's, at least I feel like, a slight amount of guilt of like, oh yeah, like I basically just leached like good software practices from sitting in an office with some smart people for years and years, and now like I sit at home in my office, and the best I can do is like tweet out something every couple days that hopefully someone sees, but it's really not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. Although I do really think you're contributing back to the commons quite a bit with your blog and your podcast and this thing and tweets, and it seems like you were actively attempting to contribute back. So I don't think much guilt is warranted, in particular with you. I think we are both appreciators of the flexibility of remote work, but also appreciators of the high throughput, high bandwidth in-person thing that happens.
Yeah, I think too, like right now, like a company that works in person is sort of it's like somewhat of a niche, at least in the software world. And I think for someone that's getting started, that can be sort of helpful and like as a focusing element. Like wherever you are based, like there is probably a handful of software agencies, and there's probably at least one that is like quote unquote like the good one, where like the good people work. And I think like focusing in there of like, oh, my goal is to like get a job there, or like meet some of the engineers there, or get an internship there or something. I think having like a specific goal like that is probably more actionable for people than like, oh, just we know that the best programmers work at insert GitHub, Facebook, or Linear, or whatever the kind of company du jour is. It's like, okay, there's like maybe 10 spots, and you're competing against tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe people that are applying, versus if you're in Boise, Idaho, like I'm sure there's a great shop there with some people that know what they're doing, and you can I think that's like a more scalable path for a lot of people than necessarily trying to become the employee at one of these places where I think you and I would agree, like these maybe are like the best of the best, like world-class people, and maybe you would learn more, but I don't know how like achievable that is. It certainly wasn't achievable for me. I mean, coming out of school, I had like one job offer, and it was the place that I ended up working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's crazy to me to hear you describe in-person software companies as a niche now.
Yeah.
Like it's so insane how, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure that's 100% true. Like, is it truly a niche? Not clear to me, but it's certainly like, it's not an absurd statement, and that itself is absurd.
It's probably the majority, but like the mind share, I feel like people just assume that like, oh yeah, all the like good software jobs are like remote now.
Yeah, that feels right. I mean, that may be one of those like things that is more of a Twitter opinion than a reality.
Oh yeah,
situation.
for sure. Yeah.
But it's not a totally nuts statement, which is kind of crazy to me, because I remember so distinctly starting Tuple and thinking like, oh yeah, something like, I don't know, maybe 5% of development jobs are remote, and like it could be as high as 10% someday, maybe 15 or 20%.
Yeah.
So how do you think you ended up as someone that is not just a technical person, but a content creator? Like you and I have both made sort of a lot of Rails related content. Most developers don't go that direction. They are sort of shy, afraid, introverted, not interested. Like, what is it about your brain or your experience that made you like a creator as well?
Yeah. I don't know that I've like introspected enough to know like how did I get here, but one thing that like is sort of top of mind is just that I like things where there's some kind of like public leaderboard that I can be sort of good at. There's probably some deep, psychological issues there of, I've tied my self-worth to like a number on a chart, and not, my qualities as a person. But like I remember when I was in high school, I was incredibly addicted to the game World of Warcraft, and that was like the only thing I cared about was like being like, in like one of the best like World of Warcraft players that there was. And like, there's this whole like hierarchy of like, you have to join like a team basically. And then, you want to be on the best team, and then you want to be like the best player on the best team and that kind of thing. And like, so I think that's just like part of my personality a little bit. And so at some point I realized I should probably channel that into something more productive than, playing World of Warcraft. And so there, I can, backfill and maybe pattern match on some of this stuff. Like I think early on, like I would post on Stack Overflow, and I was one of the people that was like, oh, I want those like badges and the points. I want to get to 10,000 points on Stack Overflow. Like why? I don't know. I just like, I do.
Number go up.
Yeah. I mean, same thing. Like on Hacker News, like someone showed me Hacker News when I was in college, and then that just became like my homepage for like the next several years. And I would like write comments there. And of course I could never catch the people like on the top leaderboard, like the Patio 11s and of the world. But I seem to remember there was like some other leaderboard that was like the average number of points per comment or something. And so I was like, oh, maybe I can be like a top 100 in like the average comment, like average upvotes per comment or something. Cause like, I'm never going to post enough. So I don't know. I think there was that. And then, early in my career working at a consulting company, like we would have brown bags and presentations and stuff at work. And like, I was very into that, and I wanted it to be like more of a thing than it was. So I would just like always sign up to give a talk, even if I didn't like really want to. I was more like hoping to get other people to give talks so that I could like learn from them. I think that, and then combined with just like the time that I sort of came into like Rails was like sort of the height of Rails and like the 2010 kind of era. If you think back, it's like content creation was like getting kind of popular for programmers then. Like I definitely remember like, oh, Zach Holman is like doing a conference talk, and it was like, almost like, the nerds version of like the next like Netflix drop was like, what is this guy gonna like say and do in a talk? And like everyone was all into like slide design, and blogging was getting very popular. And then I remember one of the first blog posts I wrote ended up like on the front page of Hacker News. And so that just kind of gave me probably an unearned confidence that like, oh yeah, like I can do this, and I am like good at writing and good at sharing my thoughts. And so that's, I don't know. I think that those two things just kind of like fit my personality well. Of like, I liked consuming programming content, and from that I kind of knew what I liked, and then I could generate some of that. And then I liked having, the kind of gamified metrics of seeing, numbers go up, bigger number, better person.
Yeah, that's interesting. That experience of the first thing hitting, I feel that as well, where I had some blog posts that did well early, and like I've noticed this myself with like when a friend introduces a game to me, a board game or something. It's like if I win the first game we play, I'm like, ooh, this game is really good. I think it's like a really interesting system. It's well designed.
Yeah.
And if I lose, I'm like, yeah, it's just not a great game, unfortunately. It's just like, I just don't think I'll probably play it again. Yeah. And like I feel like a lot of my advice to people with content production, like with making things, is like, yeah, just get started. Like make a bad version. It's fine. Like just start shipping things. But also, if you get that early hit early on, like some sort of win like that, it can really, I think, propel you.
Yeah, and I think it's like the bar is probably lower than people think. I mean, like I'm in like the Rails. I'd be pretty plugged into like the Rails ecosystem, and it's like, if you just literally posted a screenshot of like code that you wrote like once a week, like you'll be in the top like 10% of like Rails Twitter posters. Like there's not really that much to it. I think people
That's an interesting point. Like people just don't. Most people aren't posting at all, right? No. So it's like just putting anything out there, it like immediately rockets you up. That's really true.
And I think like I definitely know that from like my experience working, so there's kind of like, people are too online and they need to like touch grass. And I think there's definitely some of that with like software. And we talked earlier about like, that's, remote work as being a majority is probably like a Twitter opinion. And yeah, like, I mean, I live in the Midwest and I worked at like a no-name agency that was a great place to work. And there were smart people there that, people that went to work at big companies that you've heard of that you've never heard of the people. But like of the 100 engineers that work there, it's like there would be like 5 people that would ever like write a blog post for the company, the company blog. And I think that's the same for all of the stuff. And I don't think it's a necessarily novel insight that, like all the content is generated by, 5% of the people, but it's really not, it's not as difficult. Obviously, once you get to, the upper levels, like things get maybe more competitive, or if you're in a bigger market, like I don't know that if you post a screenshot of your JavaScript code that you're gonna, stand out or anyone's gonna care. But in an environment where it's a little smaller, and the Rails ecosystem is smaller than the JavaScript stuff online, but there's still plenty of people and plenty of opportunities, and you can still get almost all the benefits that you would from being 100,000 follower account or YouTuber if you're like a 5,000 follower account in a certain niche.
I do wonder. I do wonder how much juice there is left in the just start publishing whatever, like just put things out there in the world and don't worry about it too much kind of orange. Like I think the bar is starting to raise a bit, and like it's getting cheaper and easier to make mediocre stuff. And I think the returns to really good stuff are going up, but the returns on like average to below content is probably treading down pretty aggressively.
Yeah, I think that's true. And maybe like unstated when I say like posting a screenshot of your code, it's like that is probably more interesting than like someone that is just writing once a week, like a sort of generic blog post, just because it stands out from what the norm is. Like I think the norm is, if you want to like get into, sharing, content online or whatever, it's like, just like write a blog article, right? And I think a lot of the advice would be like, keep at it. Like you just need to consistently publish. And then that turns into like, oh yeah, once a week I'm like writing a blog article, and none of them actually end up standing out. I think some of that too is just like the media landscape has changed, and people used to use RSS readers and like read every blog post you wrote, but now like you write a blog post and you post it to Twitter, and Twitter is like devaluing links outside the platform, and
Right.
They don't look as visually enticing, and people don't have an attention span anymore, and everyone is doing video and the stuff. So yeah, I think it is changing.
Yeah, I do like that specific advice actually of like screenshot of code, where it's not taking you off the platform. It is visually interesting, and everyone's got an opinion. Like it sort of naturally is like, oh, like the people that read this are going to engage, are more likely to engage with this. Like there's a lot of this. It's very information rich and opportunity for kind of discussion.
And I think in a lot of ways, like it shortcuts some of the things that you have to do. Like normally, if you're going to write an article, like a blog article, you might say like, oh, well, I need to like genericize this code so that it makes sense to someone that's just finding it. And it's like, well, if I'm just literally posting like, here's a code snippet I wrote, like I don't have to strip the context out. So I don't have to kind of like water it down. Maybe there is some element in there that wasn't the main thing I was trying to share, but someone's like, oh, I really liked how you like named that thing. And it's like, oh, well, I was going to, take that name out because that's like a very specific thing to my code base that doesn't fit in a, in a more general sense. So I don't know, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's just like demonstration that like this is actually real code in a production app and not just, someone like regurgitating a tutorial, or this has never been tried. That's maybe specific to the Rails side of things. Like I think Rails itself like highly values things and that are extracted from real projects and not, conceived from theoretical bases. Like if I was starting, encouraging someone to like start, I would definitely try to have them think about it in like a marketing sense, or like what is like like, can you package up whatever post or piece of content you're going to do into like more of an event or something that stands out more than just, hey, I wrote an article and like link to like a, a dev2 post. That's what that's what I do, like myself even. I mean, I'm very streaky when it comes to like writing. And so the way that I compensate for that is like, I'll frame it as like I'm doing a season of something. So whether it's a podcast or a blog, it's like, okay, maybe I'll write 3 blog posts and then I'll lump them up together. Like I don't remember if it was last summer or the summer before, but I did like a thing that was like, oh, this is like the summer of Hotwire. So I'll be releasing a new post every week for like the month of July about Hotwire. And it was like, there was more excitement and there was more, it was like more shareable, or like people were more interested in it than if I just
Yeah.
said, published like, here's part 1 of 4 of my Hotwire series.
I like that a lot. I think, and it's funny because you're just drawing like a kind of fake box around something and putting a name on it.
Oh yeah.
But I do agree it works. Like, it's just like, it's good marketing. It's good positioning.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably I'm just stealing this from Gary Bernhardt when he used to do his weekly like just Rails software, and then at some point he like packaged it up and it's like, this is like the programmer's compendia, and it's like 30 screencasts all at once, and it was like, oh, like you've just repackaged this, but it feels like more done. And I think to him it was more like, oh, people are expecting this as like a weekly product. And if I frame it as a weekly product, if I frame this as a blog post, people just think it's a blog post. If I frame this as like, oh, this is an event, like be sure to like pay attention to it. I think it helps.
Yeah, totally. How did you get hired at Eros?
Through Twitter.
Nice. Say more.
Well, it was sort of twofold. So Daniel and Benedict were the founders of Arrows, like sort of were following me from Twitter since they were building a Rails app and I was posting about Rails things on Twitter. And then on the flip side, Daniel and Benedict also had a podcast. And so I was listening to their podcast. And so I kind of like was getting to know them from their podcast. And they were sort of getting to know me from like my blog and Twitter. And at some point they were hiring and they reached out to me, and it was actually like at the beginning I said no, like not right now. Basically, I was like buying a house and moving and lots of stuff going on, and frankly, like sort of scared because I had been at my other job for like 11 years, and that was the only job that I had worked. So I kind of stalled and said like, oh well, maybe if you're still looking in a month, like let me know. Kind of thinking like, well, I'm sure they'll find somebody else, and I can sit here in my comfort zone. And the month came and they said, hey, we still are still looking. And so I don't know. I just was able to like make the leap at that point. But I just remember thinking before I said yes, I was like, oh, I'm listening to this podcast, and I listened to like a lot of the like, startup build your company, behind the scenes podcasts. And I was just like, oh, am I just going to like, is this going to be another podcast where I listen and just in 2 years, I'm like, oh yeah, I've been listening to this podcast for 2 years? Or am I going to like join and be like, I know that there's going to be success here, and why am I not, taking the opportunity to actually get involved?
And so how much how much proving of your skills was there?
Not really anything. I mean, they sort of knew that I could write Rails code, and so I think my interview was, we just had like more of like a vibes check. Like, is everyone like gonna get along? Am I excited about what they're doing? And yeah, I mean, there was no like resume or like coding test or anything like that.
Yeah.
Actually, don't think I've ever sent a resume for anything. I mean, maybe so. Like the one job I had before Arrows, I worked there when I was in school as an intern. So I guess I probably sent in a resume for that. But I worked there, as an intern, and then I joined after I graduated. So because I had worked there already, I didn't need to like really interview again. And then, this is really only my second, job. So over 2 at having to like jump through hoops, which is good because I think I would probably, do terrible at a coding challenge interview.
That's interesting, actually. Like, I think the point of, if you make enough content and you demonstrate your competence, you can really short circuit the interview process, or at least the sort of like skill proving component, and it becomes more of a vibe check, which I think is true and great. That's awesome. That's a great argument for it. But it's maybe even more of an argument if you don't feel like you are going to interview particularly well. Like, if that sort of like prove
Yeah.
your skills in real time in a coding challenge kind of format is a bad fit for your brain, then it's maybe even more reason to demonstrate the competence in a low pressure way.
Yeah, I think that rings true, at least for me. Like, I don't have so much like a problem with like being put on the spot. It's more just like I don't do well with like algorithmic type problems. Like I just don't think like that very often. And like a lot of the work that I've done, to be frank, is more like application building, database, CRUD record type stuff. And it's just kind of different from like, oh, if you need to efficiently traverse, this graph, like, sometimes when I hear people talk about that, I'm just like, I don't ever do that. I couldn't do, I could probably do it if I sat down, but like, especially on the spot, that would be, bad for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the more you're worried about that, the more an argument it is to get those artifacts of competence out in the world.
Yeah, and I think if you have practiced the skill of like, publishing things, even if you still have to do like a traditional like job interview process, I think you'll probably stand out just because the bar is pretty low when it comes to like a cover letter or doing your research about a company or having, asking good questions. And I think if you're thinking about it like that, you're already, going to have a much better time than probably the majority of people.
All right, this is sort of self-serving, but you included this tweet where you asked, why hasn't there been a better Ruby or Rails talk in the last 15 years than this one? And you shared a link to my Aloha Ruby refactoring from good to great talk, which is, first of all, thank you, but also,
Yeah, it's true. Objectively.
I'm curious why you feel like that's true. Like, I am proud of that talk. I think it was good, but I mean, and I don't have my finger on the pulse in the Rails education or Rails conference talk world anymore, so I have no ability to actually evaluate that claim. But I'm curious why it feels true to you.
I think to me, it was more of like it hit me at the right time, and I think it is long lasting because you're talking about ideas and how you take ideas and practices that are also long lasting and apply them in a very practical way. And so that to me is always going to put a conference talk like in the top 10 percentile. Just because it's not, let me tell you a story about this thing, which are great entertainment, but it's like, there's nothing I can take from that. And so I don't know. I think a lot of, I talked about this with Aaron Francis on my podcast when we were talking about programming books. And I think some of it too is like, during that time, it was like the last time before like a lot of programming knowledge and communities and resources and stuff like fully became super like decentralized. And, the Pragmatic Programmer's book is, a great book, but it was also probably the last book that was like published in Borders that like literally applied to every niche and industry. Right. And this is like kind of a time before like ebooks were, as popular and people were like, oh, just buy my, PDF on Gumroad. So there's really like a curation and like a shared like language around these things. And so I think intentionally or not, like in your talk, you kind of are building upon those ideas that were like kind of broadcast out to like all programmers that were working, in the year, 2012 or whatever. And those ideas have just stayed longer in like the shared zeitgeist of programming or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't intentionally back then thinking like I want to give a talk that will still be relevant many years later, but I'm very glad I kind of accidentally did that. Like I do find people are like will find that talk and appreciate it now.
Yeah.
So the returns on that talk, that was a hard talk to prepare because it's a bunch of live coding, and it was the distillation of years of learning interesting coding lessons at Thawbot. But the returns have still been absurd because I accidentally focused on topics that are still relevant today, and so people still find value from it.
Yeah. I think part of it too is like, again, just more kind of happy accidents of like Rails itself, like has not really changed that much. Like we still have models and we still have controllers, and even though I don't, probably it was like a Rails 3 app or something, right? And we're on like about to be on Rails 8 here. But the same ideas still apply. Like people are still having the same problems of putting, too much code in certain places, and the answers are still like, the same as they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think I also was really interested in sort of like the object-oriented design principles as well. So like a number of the points of that talk are kind of language and framework agnostic, really, because it's actually about good object orientation.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think, to keep, serving your own interest here, like I think it was like a good talk in general. Like it was, I think you did a lot of things in there that are maybe not obvious around the pacing and getting, I'm sure it was great to see live, and like a live coding talk is always more interesting. There's like an element of danger and uncertainty to it that, makes it more exciting.
Totally, yes. And that part actually was intentional, which is I realized that people being scared that I won't be able to pull off the live coding talk was a huge feature and like made it a better talk because it wakes people up.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's probably like a healthier form of like, I know if I tweet something like controversial or like, drama baity, that it will like get people's attention. That's probably like a better way of doing things, of like, oh, I'm putting myself in a high risk situation.
Yes.
Everyone wants to see what happens next.
Well, and I felt like so many conference talks, like slides are like dead, like they're static. And so the thing I kept coming back to as I was thinking of talks back when I was doing these so frequently was like, why is it worth watching this talk live? Like, why be here? And if I'm just reciting ideas, if I pre-write all of my ideas and then go through them with a slide deck, it's kind of like, well, you could just watch this at 1.75x by yourself. So I wanted more of an element of a performance to be happening.
Yeah.
Like, you can still watch the video and it's okay. But if you were in that room, like you felt something as this started, I think. And like I asked the audience questions, and like their input shapes the talk a little bit at least. And so it's like, okay, there's a reason to be here with me. It's slightly better because you're here.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like you lose that nowadays, like because the analog of a conference talk now is like a YouTube video, right? And but you can sort of edit and re-record and do another take, and so I think you lose some of that excitement that comes from the performance.
Yeah.
Probably what it gets replaced with, like that's tickling like the same part of the brain as like the drama and inflammatory content that that kind of fills the gap. I would posit.
All right, I've never seen Nathan For You. Why should I watch this show?
Oh, I can't believe this. This is actually blowing my mind because deep cut Ben Orenstein fans will know that you used to have a podcast called, what was it called? Account Details, where you had sort of,
oh my God,
that's a crazy like business comedy ideas with a friend of yours. And this is basically that as a TV show. But I just think it's really, to me, it like scratches all the right itches of like mischief and like creative outside the box thinking that I think helps you think of new ideas. So, I mean, the premise of the show is that Nathan Fielder is like a business consultant that comes to help these small businesses, but his ideas are always just like a little bit out there, but he plays it completely straight and is deadpan. And so Like in the first episode, he tells a pizza company that they should offer a delivery, and if they don't deliver the pizza within 10 minutes, then it'll be free. And the pizza owner is like, well, we can't deliver a pizza in 10 minutes. It takes us like 12 minutes to make a pizza. And so Nathan, just in complete deadpan, just says, well, like, yes, but we didn't specify the size of the free pizza. So he has them make a small, like a 1-inch like pizza bagel, and that's the free pizza. So, the pizza owner is like, won't the customers be mad? And Nathan is like, no, I don't think they'll be mad. And so then the rest of the show is them delivering these pizzas, and the customers are like, yeah, this should be free. Like it took you 30 minutes. And the poor delivery driver like gives them this little pizza bagel and says, well, here's your free pizza. And so the premises are always similar to that. But to me, it's like just a great example of taking a problem and then breaking it down and then finding what areas you can push on a little bit, and maybe something great will come out of it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you're the second or third person who's recommended this particular show to me, so I think there's something in it that people are seeing.
I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah. It does sound like me.
I guess it depends on your tolerance for like cringe humor in television.
Yeah. Well, in practice, I find I have almost no television tolerance, so we'll see. Every once in a while, I'll get into a show, but it's even the good ones. It takes a lot to hook me.
Yeah.
But I also am down to try. I test things out. Any other topics you are feeling passionate about that you'd like to chat about?
I don't know. Do you want to talk about selling ads on the penny? That's like a Nathan for you.
Yes,
scheme.
let's hit it. Hit me with your scheme.
Well, so the common adage that like it costs 3 cents to make a penny because the cost of the materials. So my idea was like, why doesn't the government sell ads on the back of the penny to just kind of recoup the costs? So then instead of us spending, we're losing 2 cents every time you make a penny. We could be potentially gaining, 3 to 4 cents every time a penny is made. And I think it's just a good advertising platform for a company. Like the money is going to be around for hundreds of years. If you're like Chase Bank, you want Chase Bank to be on the back of the money. You don't want, what's another bank? Bank of America on there. McDonald's and Burger King, they'll be fighting over who could be on the penny. I just think it's very American to sell ads on the back of the penny. And then, everyone really loved the state quarters when those came out, collecting all the state quarters. So I think this could be the same. Every season you could have a new drop of, branded currency merch.
It's intriguing. I feel like they should sell ads on the penny and then just discontinue. Just be like, all right, we've jumped the shark. We did it knowingly and now we just decided that's it. We're good.
Yeah. I think people could be putting ads on a lot more things.
I guess. Is that good?
Well, maybe. I guess it just depends. I mean, I always wondered, and the pandemic really kind of messed it up. But like, if people would start selling ads like inside of a cubicle, like you could put, your ads on, the inside of a cubicle, and then maybe I could get like a free keyboard in exchange for having this ad that's just in my periphery.
Maybe we should just pass on the penny costs to the people that want pennies. It's like you can continue to use pennies, but they cost 3 cents now. Oh,
interesting. Yeah, I don't know how the math on that would work out, but yeah, I'm not a big supporter of the penny. It's just free money, that they could be charging someone for.
Totally, yeah. I think I do appreciate a distinction between some sort of sacrosanct government thing and not shilling private enterprise on it. Like ads on the Capitol building or something sure could make money, but it's sort of offensive somehow.
They could have the naming rights to it like they do for sports arenas. The crypto.com Jefferson Memorial.
Oh, okay.
Not into that. All right.
Yeah. No, I think I'm pro less advertising than more. But I like the outside the box thinking. Let's keep it going.
Keep it going. Keep it up. We'll get something good.
Totally. We'll workshop it. Dream up all new currency. subscription-based currency. Has anyone tried this yet?
Yes, I think all the people are currently in jail.
Okay, great. Well, like I said, we'll workshop it.
Yeah. I mean, cryptocurrency has been around, for decades. They just used to call it Cole's Cash, but
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for dropping by the podcast and sharing your knowledge. And please continue publishing. There's not a lot of programmers that write well, speak well, put that stuff out there. So keep going.
yeah, thanks. I enjoy doing it, and feels good to have people tell me that. So, I love compliments. So if you have compliments, please give them.
Yes. Cool. All right. Well, take care.